Story 1. I woke up one day and realized I had been married, had a baby, worked, and taken care of a house for 3 years, and everything was good. I had not messed up my life. Story 2. Last spring, the day after my birthday, one of our cats passed away. My wife found him and was understandably beside herself. I didn't show any emotion. I just firmly guided her through the steps. Since I'd been through this a few times before, we drove out to the property where we decided to bury him, and I dug his grave. It wasn't until I lowered his little body into the ground that I completely broke. We came home, cleaned up where we found him, and I called my mom. She said, "Man, you really had to be like your dad today." I remember when our 2 dogs died when I was growing up. I had finally stepped into the unfortunate role my dad had taken on years earlier. Those responsibilities are now mine, and it was one of the worst days of my life. Being an adult is hard sometimes. Story 3. The day I finally cleared all the loans and credit card debt I had managed to amass during my 20s. Story 4. I'm 51 and still figuring things out. I told my 20-year-old son this is my first time living this life, and I'm still trying to figure out many aspects. Just because people seem to have everything together doesn't mean they do. We're all faking competence to a degree. Story 5. I got a pair of shoes resold. That seemed like a grown-ass thing to do. Story 6. I bought my first house at 25. That felt big. I sold it at 40 and built a new house myself. I am a carpenter. I am completely mortgage-free from the money I made selling my first place. That feels grown up too. I also bought a really nice big Kubota tractor. Now I feel like a kid again, happy. Story 7. The day my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I suddenly had to take over and manage her life as well as my own. Story 8. When my partner and I first hosted our friends, who were also a couple, at our new house, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Story 9. I was on a flight home from a job interview, reflecting on everything we had discussed and how much I knew. It was the culmination of 4 years of hard work and networking in that industry, and I was confident they would hire me. My pay would increase sixfold. I was 29. I got the job 2 weeks later. Story 10. The first time I paid for a full family meal for my parents, my nephews, and my sister. Story 11. I had to take my cat to the vet. The responsibility for caring for the cat had not sunk in. I realized I had to make life-changing decisions for this little creature. I remember panicking, wondering if I could do it. Story 12. When I had to pull the plug on my sister, I realized there is a difference between losing someone, as I had already lost my dad, and actively making the decision to end their suffering. Story 13. Wait, is there a moment when you were supposed to grow up? Story 14. I got an apartment with a washer and dryer. For years, I lived in studio and inexpensive apartments and had to use laundromats. Having a washer is game-changing. I do not have to lug all my clothes to some sketchy place anymore. It feels great to do my laundry casually and unplanned. Story 15. I realized I was responsible for the family's well-being, and this was reinforced later when one of the parents said I was the rock of the family. Stable, resilient, and enduring. Story 16. I was in my mid-20s and worked for my father in a small company. Right after college, I joined more or less as a favor, then stayed through a bankruptcy, which was not my father's fault. Afterward, 4 of us, including my father, started a new company. A couple of years later, he had a triple bypass. I took over and kept the company afloat for a few months while he was bedridden. We survived, and I felt very grown up after that. Story 17. I needed to use a box cutter. My father told me where to find it and did not supervise me while I used it. Story 18. Parents said there are so many opportunities for you out in the world, just not here anymore. Find a place to live. Story 19. I am 40, feel 80, and act like I am 14. I have a management-level job, a wife, a child, dogs, and a mortgage. Every day I feel like I am just making it up as I go. Story 20. When I had pain in my knee, the doctor told me to live with it, as if this were just part of life. Story 21. I handed in a bag of ketamine I found on the tube instead of keeping it for the weekend. Story 22. Step 1. I stopped accepting any money or financial help from my parents. Step 2. I don't ask for or care about anyone else's opinion about my choices, except those who would be affected by them. Step 3. I don't get so worked up and anxious about things I can't control. I am still working on this one. Story 23. I started being called sir a few years ago, whether at the grocery store, the mechanic, or the doctor's office. I'm still not used to it. Story 24. When a 16-year-old girl in Sunday school asked me for advice about whether she and her boyfriend should start going steady, I was 12. Story 25. The first and only time I woke up with a wicked hangover and still had to be a parent. Story 26. I got married and bought my own house. Felt terrible to get divorced and to have to move back into the barracks. Story 27. Traveling the world solo. Just knowing that the only person you can depend on is yourself is a grown-up flex. Story 28. I will let you know when it happens. I tell my friends not to confuse age and maturity. Story 29. I act like an adult, but I never really feel like one. Story 30. We earn $179,000 in a town where the median income is $60,000. We live in a 2,600 square foot house. My wife has a new Honda CR-V and I have a new Toyota Tundra. We have a designer dog, money in savings, and a son. I never thought I would end up like this, but I am not complaining. Story 31. When I got my own apartment for the first time in my 30s, I had previously lived with romantic partners and earlier with roommates. It felt very adult to be completely responsible for a space and to decorate everything myself. Everything in this apartment is mine. Story 32. The first time my stocks paid out a dividend, it was hard not to spend that $1.14 all at once. Story 33. There is a point many people reach when they look at a 20-year-old and realize that person is not an adult but an overgrown, foolish child. To me, that is the point of no return, the moment when you begin to understand the difference between a legal adult and an actual adult. Story 34. My first full-time job, getting my own cell phone, and my first internet plan. Story 35. Maybe next year. I am not speaking for anyone, but it just has not happened for me yet. I moved out with a girlfriend a few years ago and thought life had started. We broke up and my mom became ill. I moved in with her, and that has been my life for the past 6 years. I feel stunted. I do not respond well to life despite really trying. There are reasons behind that, not excuses. Story 36. It was not the outcome I wanted. When my mom passed away 6 years ago, I saw things differently. Story 37. Paying your own bills and being angry about how much of your paycheck goes to taxes will do it. Story 38. I was 19 when I held my oldest daughter after she was born. I had a long way to go. When my mother died, I was 38. I realized you can feel like an orphan at any age, but I had to adapt and move forward. Story 39. When I realized I was alone and had to learn to do things myself. Story 40. I was excited about a Scrub Daddy sponge and mentioned it at every opportunity for a week. Story 41. When a random man on the bus asked my opinion about recent political events, I was 15. Later, I thought he might be an undercover agent working for the government, and he thought I was a college student. Story 42. Dealing with payouts from promoters after shows when I was touring was a life lesson in handling con artists and snake oil salesmen. Story 43. I sat alone outside the operating theater, tears in my eyes as they took my partner away to be stitched up after her emergency section. They handed me my swaddled daughter and a bottle of formula to feed. I was 27 at the time and had not really felt like a proper adult. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Story 44. I am getting rejected everywhere, whether it is in my social life, my love life, or my professional life. Story 45. I don't know, it comes and goes. I am currently visiting the family I studied abroad with 8 years ago when I was 20, and I can tell I am a totally different person than I was back then. They have pointed that out as well. Instead of eating all their food without a second thought, I buy it and cook for them. I am able to talk to my former host mother more as a friend than as a mother. I went to hang out with my former host brother, who is a couple of years older than I am, and I noticed I felt very annoyed that he only wants to go clubbing and party all the time. I am over that and prefer to talk about life over coffee. Story 46. I am 30 years old with 2 children. I own my house, pay all my bills, and have been working for 13 years, but I still do not feel like a grown-up. I laugh about it. Story 47. When I started working and mothers told their children to pass me their glasses, I thought, damn, I'm a lady. Avas and my Lautatians. Story 48. I felt like a grown-up after I stopped being stubborn about many things and accepted that other people had their own destinies. Story 49. When my daughter brought home a paper for parent-teacher conferences, I felt the need to give it to my mom. Story 50. When I had to make calls myself, to place orders, speak to customer service, or make appointments, my mother handled that. Story 51. I was 15 years old when I had to quit school to work so my mother and I would not die of hunger. Story 52. In January 2021, I went to the liquor store to buy something for my mom. The cashier, who appeared to be in his 20s, did not look at my ID. I was waiting for him to take it. He said, "I can see that you're fine. I have not returned to that liquor store since." Story 53. I got a little excited when my landlord replaced the building's old washing machine with a bigger commercial one. I could finally wash a full basket in one load. I could even wash my queen-size comforter. As soon as I had that thought, I realized I had become a lame old man. Story 54. The first time I bought an energy drink without having to lie about my age. On a more serious note, I had to fight to get the right help for my mental health at age 16, and I reported a former friend to social services for endangering his younger sister at age 17. Story 55. I am 21 and I still feel 16 years old. I am not sure whether coronavirus disease 2019 just stopped my development or whether everyone feels this way. Story 56. When I moved to another city at 19 to study, I had to do everything on my own. I could not depend on anyone. I paid my bills and rent, bought groceries, cooked and cleaned. Story 57. I do not know that I completely feel like an adult yet. There is still a lot I have not done, but I recently got my own insurance, which makes me feel grown up. Story 58. I stopped being asked for identification when purchasing cigarettes and alcohol. Story 59. I was about 11 or 12 years old when I began taking care of my siblings for days at a time. My father was absent and my mother had a severe addiction. Story 60. When a police officer I had gone to elementary school with pulled me over, I realized I was old enough to be one. Story 61. I have been working every day since I was 11. I started with a paper route and mowing lawns. When I got my driver's license at 16, I began working full-time after school, on weekends, and throughout college. I did not have my first Saturday off until I was 35. Story 62. My first sexual experience was at 21. I will probably feel even more like an adult when I move where I want after college and get my own place in New York City. I also started to feel like an adult when I stopped taking prescription medications for obsessive-compulsive disorder and depression and began exercising. It took some time to recover from withdrawal symptoms, but now I feel liberated. Story 63. When my son was born, I instinctively and without fear took care of him. Changing his diaper felt so natural that I was a bit shocked. Story 64. When the checkout clerk at the grocery store called me sir, I do not believe there are such things as grown-ups. Observe people when they do not get their way. They do not look like toddlers, but they behave like toddlers. Story 65. I bought an apartment at 21, and I have not felt like an adult since. Story 66. I was 21 when I first moved out on my own. I already had a 1-year-old and was attending college full-time, so I was on welfare to get by. When that first check arrived, I spent every last dime over 2 days buying things for the house and for us, which left me with no money for the rest of the month. That moment made me feel grown up. It was when I had to learn to plan, prioritize, and accept that I was now responsible for everything. Where were the adults? Why was no one doing this for me? It was me who had to do it. I was not entitled and I did not grow up with a silver spoon. It was a wake-up call. Story 67. I felt grown up when I stopped interpreting the Bible literally at about 9 years old. Story 68. I'm 47 and have 2 children, one of whom is a teenager. I have a wife and a mortgage, but it still hasn't hit me. I still feel and think much as I did at 17. My attitudes may have changed, but I still imagine myself as a late teenager. Story 69. I turned 21 at the beginning of my senior year of college in the late 1980s. I was already engaged, living with my fiancée, and we were planning our wedding and preparing to move to a new city and state after graduation in May 1989, with the wedding in July 1989 so I could begin law school in late August 1989. We were saving for the wedding, the honeymoon, furniture for our new apartment, and moving costs such as the lease, down payment, and deposits. I worked 3 separate part-time jobs both semesters of my senior year while taking full class loads, averaging 43.5 hours each week. I worked every Saturday and Sunday from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon in the dorm where we had lived as freshmen and sophomores. The maids worked Monday through Friday. The university hired college students to work weekends. Garbage still needed to be emptied and toilet paper and paper towels still needed to be restocked on weekends. The dorm had 2 12-story buildings, a men's tower and a women's tower, 11 floors of dorms plus a walkout basement with the boiler room and the laundry room. Each floor had 2 bathrooms, so there were 24 bathrooms to clean. I did the men's building and my fiancée did the women's building. They hired 2 people each year to work weekends, and we were hired because we had lived there our first 2 years. That was 16 hours of work each week, and I had to punch a time card. I worked the breakfast shift at another dorm and had to be there at 5:30 in the morning to serve breakfast from 6 to 10:30. Because I worked the weekend cleaning job, I could only work Monday through Friday there. I worked about 4 shifts a week, 5-hour shifts, which was another 20 hours. My fiancé had a job closing the center desk in the dorm we used to live in. Full-time staff left at 4:30 in the afternoon. They hired a college student to work from 4 to 7 o'clock in the evening to close the desk. She wanted me to work half her shifts, and I did. I already worked weekends there and was an employee with a time card. I had worked for the housing manager the previous summer cleaning out the dorms. Working half her shifts added about 7.5 hours on average, bringing my total to 43.5 hours across the 3 jobs while taking full course loads. I did homework at the center desk when there was little to do, and my fiancé and I did homework on weekends after checking the bathrooms. Did not take us 8 hours to clean, so we had hours of free time. There were no computers, no social media, and no web to surf, so we did our classwork there and brought our laundry from our apartment to use the dorm laundry rooms because they were much cheaper than a laundromat. My senior year was a slog. It hit me that I was now an adult, doing what I had to do. My first 3 years had been fun and carefree, but that changed in my senior year when I was 21. Long hours, getting up early 7 days a week, attending classes, exams, writing papers, cleaning piles of feces from the shower floors, cleaning up broken glass beer bottles in the showers, and emptying a lot of nasty trash after Friday and Saturday night parties in the dorms made it clear my carefree childhood was gone for good. Story 70. I realized my parents were right about most things, and that my mom had been the main breadwinner but did not want anyone to know. Story 71. I'm 23 now and I still don't feel like an adult. I started to feel more like one when I graduated from music school this year. Getting that degree felt like I had actually done something for the first time. It was a coming-of-age period. I struggled with the mess I made of my life and my mental health as a teenager, and I slowly started to get my life together toward the end. It was a difficult period full of drunken antics and the wrong friends, but last year I mostly did away with that and focused on my studies and my guitar playing. I made it through beat up and exhausted, but more experienced and confident. I am finally in a place as a musician where I mostly know what I am doing and I can take on the world. I still do not feel like a well-adjusted adult, but I am getting there. Story 72. Being able to prepare for a vacation a year in advance felt good. I could plan my own trips. Story 73. It was a process. When I realized my thinking had become more accurate than that of most people I encountered, it felt like an arrival. Story 74. When I got my first sexually transmitted disease, I couldn't tell my parents and had to figure it out on my own. Story 75. Last year, when I decorated my first house with my long-term boyfriend for Christmas. Buying our own decorations after using the same ones my parents had for about 25 years made me feel more grown up than actually buying the house. Story 76. I have felt grown up since age 10, when I lost my mother. Everyone was shocked at how well I coped with her loss, but deep down I was not okay. It really damaged my emotional development and my teenage years. Story 77. I had a baby 3 months ago and I still do not feel like an adult. How do I have a child when I still feel like a baby? I am 30 years old. Story 78. One of the steps in realizing I have to be a grown-up is calling the mortgage company to confirm that they will take the appropriate taxes from my mortgage escrow account, because I had no idea whether they would. If I am wrong about any part of this, please let me know. Help me feel more grown up. Story 79. I recently watched Friends after a gap of a few years. There was so much more meaning in the show than I had originally experienced. For me, growth as a man means emotional development, and I have experienced significant changes. Story 80. Still waiting. 37. I imagine it will be when one of my parents dies, but that might make me feel more childlike than ever in its own way. Story 81. I was employed the first week after school. I did not even get to enjoy the summer. I graduated on Saturday and was off to work on Monday morning. So adulthood was right there. Story 82. When we bought our first home, I made my husband spray paint our address on the trash can. He said it was the most adultish thing he had ever done, laughing out loud. Story 83. I understand that no one can truly understand me but myself. Story 84. I had to call the phone company to settle a bill because my dad was too scared. Story 85. I was having more difficulty with bowel movements while thinking about the economy. Yesterday, I went to 3 different stores to fix my wife's car. Story 86. I realized that I had not felt truly happy from the bottom of my heart for a long time, and I began to miss my high school years. Story 87. I ordered a new shower curtain rod on Amazon and eagerly anticipated its arrival. Story 88. When I was 28, I began caring for my elderly grandparents. I am still caring for them. Over the last few years, I have grown a great deal emotionally and become more responsible. I am 33 now and feel like I am 50 at times. Story 89. I filled out all the paperwork for our first house. It was so freaking arcane. A stack of papers 6 inches high. The most real thing I've done in my whole life. Story 90. When someone handed me the keys to my house, I thought, you can just do that? Is everyone around me really that dumb? I'm the person responsible for some pumps, light bulbs, and batteries in the garage door opener, and they just let me do this. I got drunk, masturbated in the bathroom, then shot a gun that fires ball bearings at the basement wall and nobody could stop me. Then I realized I was going to have to repaint that spot on the wall, and I cleaned a light switch for recreation. Story 91. I have a personal Costco membership. I am 20, and my girlfriend got it for me because she works there. Story 92. I am almost 40. I own a store, a house, and a farm. I am still waiting to get that feeling. Story 93. I don't feel like a grown-up. I still feel 16, even though that was a long time ago. The biggest shock in my life so far has been becoming a dad. Especially when you have your child at 34. After years of freedom, it hits you like a rabid dog biting a postman who then crashes into a bus that swerves into you. You were just chilling with no worries or real responsibility. Story 94. I am 5'7" and can simultaneously feel like a stupid kid and an old fart. Story 95. I do not feel old until I hear people with a bratty mindset. Then I feel grown. Oh my God. My mom took my phone. I hate her. Miss, you are in college and it sounds like she is still paying for it. Story 96. I had to hold back my swear words during a fight with my boss. I reported what she said to me to Human Resources. She was removed from our unit the next day. Story 97. I am in my early 30s and still waiting for this feeling. I am currently trying to figure out my inner child issues. Story 98. When I went to Alcoholics Anonymous and started taking accountability for my own actions, it was the best day ever. Story 99. I have had my first mammogram and biopsy. I have had the same job for nearly 18 years and I care for 3 cats under 5 years old. I am waiting for my adult moment. Story 100. When I talk to someone younger who has the same insecurities I once had, it seems obvious, and seeing it from an older perspective makes me feel adult and wise. Story 101. When I went to the grocery store by myself to fill my fridge, I cried. Story 102. I was 21 at a nightclub. I saw a woman and decided to make a move. At some point, she asked my age. When I told her, she looked surprised and said I was too old for her. Story 103. After doing all the right things, a degree, a house, marriage, and an attempt at having children, and dealing with unexpected years of health problems, I realized that no matter how much you do right, life can still screw you over. I became a grown-up when I stopped caring what being a grown-up meant. Life is too short to spend years following prescribed milestones. Story 104. This is a small, silly thing, but the feeling stuck with me. I had just moved into an apartment after getting a job where I could support myself. I had been working very low-wage jobs for years and realized I needed a vacuum cleaner. I wondered how I would get one. Christmas was a long way off and maybe my grandmother had an extra. Then it occurred to me that I could just go to the store and buy one. I was an adult with money now. Items come from the store. Story 105. After I graduated high school, moved out of the house, and got a full-time job, I faced all the adult responsibilities that came with it. The feeling of being a grown-up hit me almost immediately. Story 106. A website asked me to confirm my birth date. I accidentally entered my real one, and it accepted it. Story 107. The first time I had to take care of myself when I was sick. Story 108. When younger friends and coworkers began coming to me with their problems. Story 109. I went to the bar for the first time when I reached the legal drinking age where I live. Story 110. I was on vacation with my girlfriend in Aruba. A group of adults in their early 20s bumped into me because they were not looking where they were going. One of them said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir." Am I a sir? I guess to those 20-year-olds I must look old enough to be called sir. Story 111. Probably when I was summoned for questioning by the police, I pretended to be guilty for fun, as if I were a criminal and they did not even know. Story 112. I argued just last week that, despite the records showing my body has completed 36 revolutions around the sun, I am, in fact, still a baby. Story 113. When we bought our house, I felt like I was finally winning at life. Story 114. When I was struggling to get a job and accommodation in a foreign country. Story 115. I have a whole house, a husband, and 2 kids. I still often look around for a more mature adult. Story 116. I realized I did not have to cook the turkey on Thanksgiving. I also realized I did not have to wait until November to have green bean casserole or pumpkin pie. My family now makes our own traditions because I am the adult and I say we can. Story 117. A few years ago, I was promoted at work. I realized I held a position of power and had to be extremely responsible for the people who depended on me for their safety and security. Story 118. This is a fucked up story. I felt grown up starting when I was about 8. My dad was an abusive alcoholic and drug addict. Mom would leave us with him when he got nasty with her. She believed he would not hurt us because we were his kids. Laughing out loud. She would go shopping or drive around until she felt he had finally calmed down or passed out. One night, he was very intoxicated and agitated, so she left. My little brother was very sick with the flu. He was crying and did not feel well, and our dad was passed out. I tried waking him up but could not. So I sprang into action. I took out the thermometer. I remembered how to use it. I do not remember the exact temperature, only that he had a fever. I knew we had children's acetaminophen for fevers. I took the liquid acetaminophen, read the label to determine the correct dose, and gave it to him. He kept saying he felt hot, so I put an ice pack on his head. He calmed down, and after a little while he started feeling better. Mom came home. 8-year-old me was very proud of myself for taking care of my brother. She was furious that I gave him medicine by myself and I got grounded. But hey, someone there had to be the parent. Story 119. The moment my younger sibling and I were told that our father had died unexpectedly, we were not yet teenagers, so I quickly felt I had to grow up and be strong for my family. Story 120. When I bought my first home, I was 26 years old and single. Story 121. Every time I have to cut a watermelon, I instinctively look for an adult. I am 39. Story 122. I can count on one hand how many times I've seen my father show any vulnerability. What he said to me after my grandfather's funeral still sticks with me to this day. He looked at me and said, "This is the first time in my entire life that I actually feel like an adult." Story 123. I became the eldest in my family after my parents and grandparents died. I have one uncle left. It is odd to have an older relative. Story 124. I had to pay taxes for the first time and realized my life had peaked the previous year. Story 125. I hired a financial advisor on the premise that I did not have a lot of money but asked for help investing some. They took me on as a charity case. Now I have a plan. Story 126. I was at a playground climbing the rope structure while a bunch of kids hung on my back. A child I was not with got hurt and ran to me, screaming, "I need an adult." I replied, "Let's go get you one." Then I realized I was the adult she meant. The child was utterly baffled that I did not know. Story 127. My wife and I were genuinely excited to get our first kitchen table. Story 128. I had to go over and ask my 20-year-old neighbors, who were drinking on their front steps, to please be quiet because I was trying to get my 1-year-old to bed. Story 129. I did not end up going to college or touring any campuses, so I traveled for about a year after graduating. When I was ready to commit to a job, I decided to pursue a makeup artist certification and book a tour at a local makeup school. I did not tell my dad, who I was living with at the time, and I went through the process on my own. I was very proud. Parents generally like to be involved and supportive with schooling, but to be honest, I am more reserved about my personal goals. When I told my dad, he said he would not pay for it. I got a job shortly afterward. I have been focused on saving money, and sadly they moved and it is now too far from me. At least I have the money to finally do it. Story 130. People stop telling me I look really young for having 3 kids. My children are now 16, and 18, and I apparently do look old enough to have even one adult child. I guess I am a fucking grown-up, laughing out loud. Story 131. When the Internal Revenue Service notified me by certified mail that I was in trouble. Story 132. At 29, when my first daughter was born, she was whisked off to the intensive care unit. While I sat next to her, a nurse with a clipboard asked, "Dad, what is her name?" Suddenly it hit me, holy shit, I'm someone's dad. Story 133. I was awakened by a phone call from my father. He was barely intelligible and clearly unwell. My partner and I were out of the house within minutes and drove over the hill. When I arrived, he was clearly ill, so I called an ambulance. Turned out he had a heart attack. While we waited, I delegated tasks to my partner and my aunt, who was advising by phone, packed a bag for him and some supplies for us, removed a bookcase from the wall to help evacuate him, ensured the ambulance found the right address, and rode with him to the hospital. He has recovered. To all appearances, I was calm, collected, and in control. Internally, I was panicking. I realized that the difference between being a child and being an adult is feeling the panic but acting sensibly. Story 134. I think growing up is a lie and one's age simply increases. That is just my opinion. Please do not call me out for it. Story 135. When I arrived at my first duty station in the Air Force, I could finally buy pudding cups because my mother would never buy them. Story 136. It really happened when my wife looked at me and asked how we could help her brother move into his first place. We replaced our Ingvar Kamprad Elmtrid Gunnery dishes with something nicer and gave our Ingvar Kamprad Elmtrid Gunnery items to him. I realized that people had done that for me when I was moving out for the first time, and it felt especially real because my wife was looking at me when we decided. It is a weird feeling. I am 35. Story 137. I am still a kid, pretending to be an adult. I will let you know. Story 138. I enjoy shopping for groceries and organizational appliances that make life cleaner and easier. Story 139. When my grandmother stopped putting money in my birthday card. Story 140. The day I looked at my to-do list and saw nothing fun on it. It said 1. Find a new primary care doctor. 2. Pay property tax. 3. Do estate planning. 4. Do physical therapy. 5. Reschedule my psychotherapy session. Story 141. Folding a fitted sheet correctly was a pretty big milestone for me. Story 142. I had 3 children, but I did not feel like a grown-up until the neighbor's mother died and I brought her flowers and hugged her. I did not want to, but I knew that was what a grown-up would do. Story 143. I was having a mental breakdown while driving home from a shitty warehouse job at 1 a.m. Story 144. The first time I bought my mother 2 couches paid in cash. The salesman who helped us called and said he was really impressed. I was about 21 then. Fast forward to 32 with 2 children, and it hit me how much harder it is when I have to care for a very sick child. The newborn phase didn't really hit me until I had to care for my son, who had just recovered from pneumonia. Story 145. When my mother-in-law said that I could sit at the big table for holiday meals. Story 146. When I bought a garden hose for the house I had just purchased. Story 147. I moved out at 18. My dad came over to my apartment and opened the fridge, where he saw a case of beer. He began to berate me, and I told him that if he did not like it, he could leave my apartment. He actually shut up. I have never felt more grown up. Story 148. At 16, when my piece of shit old man walked out on us, I suddenly became the man of the house. Story 149. I got a new mattress topper for my 26th birthday. I remember thinking, yep, this is adulthood. Story 150. I am 47 and still waiting for that to happen. If I had to pick something, I would say the first time I had to buy my own toilet paper. Story 151. I had one of those situations when, as a child, you were supposed to find an adult, but then I realized it was me and I would have to take care of it. Story 152. I am 18 and went grocery shopping by myself with my mom's card. Laughing out loud. I felt so grown up. Story 153. I had to take a day off work to bring my wife to the doctor. Story 154. I still don't feel like a grown-up, and it's embarrassing as hell. I am 27. Story 155. I closed on my first house at age 27. It was many years ago when typical 27-year-olds could afford a nice home. Story 156. I don't know, but I have likely been going in reverse in some ways. Story 157. I was 32 years old with a happy life, a happy marriage, and a happy baby, yet I still never really felt like a grown-up. My husband went in for surgery to repair an ulcer, and the doctor came out to tell me he had stomach cancer and 3 to 6 months to live. I had always wondered when I would feel like a grown-up, and that was the moment. Story 158. I am looking at my retirement accounts and have concluded that it is possible to retire in 10 years. Story 159. At 43, I am convinced there is no such thing as grown-ups, just kids still faking it until we make it in old bodies. Story 160. At 18, I carried my groceries back to my rundown basement apartment. I was poor but free. Story 161. You do not realize your back is on fire until about 30. By 35 or 36, you begin to figure out how to put the fire out. In my case, around 35, I started putting the pieces together. Story 162. I got married at 20. I always contributed to the bills but never actually paid them. After we separated and I started doing it myself, I had a moment when I realized I was an adult. I am 38 and laughing. Story 163. I was happy to receive new car tires for my birthday. Story 164. I realized I was doing better than my emotionally abusive mother. I am in a much better place than she was at that age and, honestly, than she is now. I may act like a kid with my children, but I would do anything to support them. Story 165. There is no moment, only increasing feelings of dread and the realization that it will never come. A modicum of peace lies in that epiphany. Story 166. When I realized no one would help in a bad situation except me, I stopped looking for someone else to fix it and took responsibility. This is vague for privacy reasons, but it is up to us to fix things. Doctors and other professionals rarely help. They often make you or the person you are trying to help seem at fault. There was no support system, so I worked hard and fixed the problem. There is no one coming to rescue you. The resources you are told to turn to do not help. That caused me a lot of anger at the time, but I emerged stronger and able to help the people I love. Story 167. I am the only person in my family on both sides who does not smoke cigarettes, but I do not have a problem with people smoking. I just never allowed it in my car. When I graduated university and started my professional work, I was fortunate enough to purchase a home. At that time, I decided that no one would be allowed to smoke in my house. My mom came to visit for a couple of days. At one point, she went to the bathroom. When she returned to the living room, she had a strange look on her face. I immediately asked what was wrong. She replied, "Nothing." I studied her face and was convinced something was wrong. So I asked, "What did you do? I can tell by your expression that you are hiding something." That is when I realized she had smoked in the bathroom. "Oh my God. You smoked in my bathroom, didn't you?" She turned red and giggled. She was embarrassed that she had been caught. I chastised her. "I cannot believe you would disrespect me like that. You would have kicked my ass if I had done something like that in your house." I told her this was her one freebie. If she ever did that again, she would be banned from my home. She grew more embarrassed and apologized for her actions. This was the moment I felt like a true grown-up. Story 168. When I made my first rent payment, I realized I was responsible for where I lived. Story 169. It was a conversation with my partner at the time when I realized that if we somehow slipped up and became pregnant, we would be able to handle a child. She disagreed. Obviously, we are not together anymore. Story 170. I was buying a pizza when the teenager behind the counter said she thought I knew her father. I told her I was not old enough to know her father, but I actually did. Story 171. I still feel like I'm 12, but the first oh shit moment of adulthood came when I bought my first new car on my own without a cosigner. I had just finished college and started my first adult job. Before that, my dad had gotten me my first car. It was a beater, more often in the shop than with me, and I had bought it from a random person who replied to an ad in the paper. Story 172. I live in Australia. A massive huntsman spider was on the inside of the passenger side window of my car. It was just me and my 3 children. All 3 were screaming. That was the moment I knew I was the adult. I had to deal with it. Story 173. I would say it was when I moved out and had an apartment with my boyfriend. That lasted about 2 years. Now we are both back at our parents' houses. Story 174. When I became a dad, something changed. Now I feel like a much more grown-up man than I was 4 years ago. Story 175. At 36, I don't know why, but that year I felt like my opinions finally had merit. I owned a house, a company, was married, and had 2 kids with a third on the way. I felt successful and able to give good advice. It made me feel like an adult. Story 176. When I was finally able to buy the more expensive Godzilla figures with my own money. Story 177. As a child, my dentist was mean and terrified me. Story 178. I was always waiting for a switch. It turns out you are just the same scared child underneath, with some wisdom gained from having been through it. Story 179. I am 30 with a career, a husband, and 3 children. I still do not feel like an adult. Story 180. I don't think people have grown up. I still see 60-plus-year-old men and women throwing tantrums like children when they are mildly inconvenienced. The only difference is that their punches can cause grievous harm. Story 181. Although I don't think I will ever feel truly grown up, and most people stay children at heart, I realized I had changed when I woke up on my 18th birthday. I could go anywhere and do what I wanted. All the legal restrictions were gone. I could buy as much alcohol as I wanted and nobody would stop me. I could book a plane ticket, to the other side of the world, and nobody would ask where my parents were. My parents couldn't access my bank account. I could make appointments without needing permission from my parents. I felt and still feel grown up ever since then. I am still 18, laughing out loud. That immense freedom you get from not being a minor anymore was great. Story 182. I was sitting in an office at a car dealership, buying my first car right after my 18th birthday. My mother was not there to sign the paperwork for me, and I was absolutely terrified. Story 183. When I was finally able to dress off without feeling like I was sexualizing myself unnecessarily. Story 184. I'm 38. I vividly remember walking into Home Depot about 10 years ago and being excited to look around. I realized in that moment that I finally felt like a grown-up. Story 185. I expected to finish filing my taxes and receive my refund 3 weeks after the beginning of tax season. But now it is 2 months after the start of tax season because I have to wait for my wife to finalize her many tax forms. Story 186. Taking my son to his pediatrician appointments sometimes tricks me into believing I am a full-fledged adult. I also have conversations about bills with my partner. Story 187. When I realized my child was reading serious chapter books and that 100% of his phonics and reading instruction had come from me, I knew I had led a human to literacy. That felt enormous. Story 188. When I started asking for socks, underwear, and clothes for Christmas instead of tech or toys. Story 189. Recently, I successfully parallel parked for the first time. I am 35. Story 190. When I got health insurance through a job in 2007, I thought I was being scammed because I had to pay for the actual doctor's visit. Then I learned that American health insurance exploits us all. Story 191. The day I signed up for a 401k retirement plan at work, I was about 40. I wish I had started sooner, but 10 years ago I had no health insurance, no holiday pay, and no retirement account, so I felt very grown up when I got all of those that year. Story 192. When I got my driver's license, I no longer needed to rely on public transit, friends, and family to get around. Story 193. It is weird. There is not really a moment I could point to. In a sense, I still do not feel like a grown-up. But as I sit here in the house I own holding my child, it is pretty clear I have grown up. Story 194. My baby had a mysterious illness, and we were in the emergency room in the middle of the night when the doctor said it might be cancer. I grew up very quickly that night and have felt like a real adult ever since. Thankfully, it was not cancer, and he is a healthy, large child now. Story 195. Getting a Canadian Automobile Association membership, like the American Automobile Association in the United States. Also getting a cooperative number. We all own the cooperative. Story 196. I do not remember exactly what the problem was, but when I was 19 or so, something came up that I did not know how to handle. It felt like the first time I did not go to my parents and ask how to do this adult thing. Instead, I figured it out on my own and did it. Story 197. The death of a parent means you no longer have someone to look up to. You are now the person your children look up to. Story 198. I got a good job and my own place, paying the bills and so on. It did not really hit me. I still felt like a kid in a college dorm, to be honest. Then I got a phone call. The caller asked, "Is this Mr. Summonses?" I replied, "Yes, I suppose it is," laughing out loud. Story 199. I woke up in the middle of the night during a rainstorm and realized I had forgotten to set out the pots to stop the drip from damaging our kitchen. So I went to the kitchen, but nothing was dripping. Then I remembered that my buddy and I had already patched the roof 2 weeks earlier, so I didn't have to worry about the leaks anymore. This is what winning looks like now. Story 200. I don't have it. I get messages from old school friends sometimes saying, "Oh man, we're so old now." And I can only reply, "Maybe you are old, but I'm turning 23 again this year." Story 201. I am 50 years old. My dad died last month. That was the first time. Story 202. It is only a matter of time until death. I probably will not get that either. Story 203. I sat in the hospital, miscarrying at 19 weeks. The doctors were younger than me. I was in my late 30s, and one looked like a kid as they explained the next steps. Story 204. Bills, expenses, and pay disappearing into thin air, just like that. Story 205. A couple of years ago, we had friends staying over. For breakfast, we bought delicious bagels, and I wanted to serve them hot at the same time. So the day before they came into town, I bought a 4-slot toaster. That was the day I became an adult. Story 206. I took my father and his family out to dinner. I gave the host my credit card so he would not have to pay for the meal. He was impressed that I had paid the bill without telling him. I also bought 2 pairs of running shoes for him. They were not on sale. Story 207. Grown up? I'll get back to you on that. I'm in my late 40s. I felt like an adult. Married, with a car and a house, and working far away from home. My first time, however, was when I discovered I was the adult supervisor at a teenage party. I taught the teenagers to drink responsibly and not vomit outside the bathroom. I did not realize I was the adult supervisor until I noticed I was the oldest person there. Story 208. Once I started setting boundaries and staying true to them, paying for my own things and sometimes treating others, planning and choosing my own college courses, enjoying things for my own sake, to name a few. Story 209. I have not yet. I am 46. I am still trying to figure life out. Story 210. There is a moment when you do the math and realize you could afford to wear a brand new pair of socks every day of your life. It is cheaper than daily coffee. Still, you decide that no matter how comfortable and thick new socks are, you cannot justify the waste. Story 211. I went on an annual fishing trip with my grandfather and his eldest brother. We used to get 2 cups of coffee and a hot chocolate. The year I was 14, they ordered 3 cups of coffee. It was such a small thing, but a core memory for me. Story 212. My architect's license paperwork was approved, and I received my professional license on my 30th birthday. My wife was 8 months pregnant at the time. Story 213. I set up digital subscriber line service for a customer when I was 12, back when setting up the internet was more challenging. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.